We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio. I remain your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our talk with Joe Schaefer, Andrew Moran, and Tim Donner on Major League Baseball. It's a bit of a special edition for you. Now, for our last segment here, I guess the question I want to ask is, we talked about how, from some aspects, money has been bringing down the respect for the game that many people had. But is it a better game now than it was 20, 30, 40 years ago? Because I'm not a big football fan. By football here, I mean soccer. But if you take a player from the 1966 World Cup, Britain's last glory day in terms of international football, and you take the key players from that team, you put them against middling players today, I think it would be night and day. I think the middling players they're so much faster and more aggressive in their plays and their skills, especially a lot of the South American players, the skills, because they've both learned to play in very tight quarters, which means they can manipulate a ball rather than just passing and kicking over distance. It's a very different sport, but away from soccer for now, and let's get that question to baseball. Is it a different game? Is it better for the fans? The actual gameplay. Tim, why don't you kick us off on this?
Well, all you have to do is look at an old tape of a game from the 1950s or 60s. Look at the builds of the players, the muscular build, the skeletal outline of the players, and you can see that it's an entirely different game now. Balls can be hit much further. Pitches can be thrown much faster. I mean, it used to be when somebody threw the ball 100 miles an hour 20 years ago, it was a headline in the baseball, among baseball enthusiasts. Wow, we hit 100 miles an hour. Now you've got probably 4 or 5 pitchers on every pitching staff that can throw the ball more than 100 miles an hour, and nobody pays much attention. The athletes are clearly superior to those of the old days because they have so much more available to them to keep themselves fit. Another big thing is that it used to be that baseball had such paltry salaries that most players had to hold down another job in the off season. But now with an average salary of $4 million for major league players, they turned baseball into a year-round endeavor, and they're working out through the entirety of the off season, through the late fall and winter to get ready for the next season. So the quality of the game is no comparison now to 30 or 40 years ago. Does that mean that the product is better? Well, that's open to the eye of the beholder. But there's no question that the athletes in baseball are faster, stronger, pitch better, run faster, and just all the elements that make a baseball player. It's clearly a superior product. But as I said, and I'm sure Joe will weigh in on this, if not Andrew, the fact that the players are so much more advanced is separate from the issue of whether the product that's put on the field is better than when we were all growing up.
What do you say, Joe? Is it a game that you enjoy more as an adult or as a kid? And is part of that a nostalgia issue?
It's not just nostalgia, although that is a big part of it. And I would think Tim would agree with me. Everything he said was unassailable. But the big difference between the game that I grew up watching, that he grew up watching, and today is fundamentals. That these players do not have fundamentals. And a lot of it is the game today is based on home runs and power pitching to get these guys to throw 100 miles per hour, but they can only go 5 innings because they're throwing maximum every pitch. You know, Nolan Ryan, who threw 100 miles per hour 30 years ago when he was 40 years old, could throw 140 pitches and go 8-9 innings. So Are these pitchers better than that today because of that? I don't know. The big difference to me with baseball is bat on ball contact hitting. Where are the 300 hitters? And I understand it's harder to hit. These guys throwing 100 miles with the ball moving and all, but just the complete lack of 300 hitters and the idea, which is prevalent with this analytics driven thing in baseball, the idea that a base hit can be a bad thing. That you can hit a single and it's like, well, statistically, a guy who strikes out, 4 or 5 times and then hits 1 home run is better than a guy who's hitting 330 and they're all singles. I've never bought that. I've never accepted that. Rod Carew, is a great player. Rod Carew would be a great player today. I don't know if teams would even want Rod Carew in the team today because he didn't hit enough home runs. But for me, that style of baseball was better. It's not nostalgia. As a fan, I enjoy watching the ball getting in the gaps, getting in the field, the fielders having to make a play, the base runners running. And to me, that has been it's not gone, but it's been reduced. And I'm kind of hoping it comes back. You're seeing some really good hitters coming up into the game nowadays. I'd like to see a return to the 300 hitter and just fundamentally sound sports.
What do you reckon, Andrew? MBGA, make baseball great again?
Well, I'm a bit on both camps. I'm with both Tim and Joe. But you have to give credit to Rob Manfred. He's the commissioner of MLB. And despite his ridiculous handling of the Astros cheating scandal, he's made some positive moves to, appease all sides of the argument. One of the things he did was introduce a pitch clock. Now, I was hesitant because I'm a purist. I love, when pitchers step out of the box and try to do the mound, and they try to do head games with the opposing players, yada, yada, yada. But overall, that pitch count has made the game a lot more enjoyable, especially if you're a 40-year-old person who has to work the next day and doesn't want to stay up till midnight watching a game between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Cincinnati Reds. You don't want to do those things. Sorry, Joe, I'm just kidding. Excuse me. But overall, and also another thing is that they banned the shift and they made the bases bigger to encourage more base running stealing. So all these things, they're trying to do a balancing act by Major League Baseball. But one thing you'll learn, Mark, is that one thing that baseball fans love is statistics. And you go back, you look at some of the greatest hitters in MLB history, and they will not be able to stack up with some of today's pitchers. You see the movement on these 98 mile per hour or curveballs or sweepers or cutters. It's just absolutely phenomenal what these pitchers are doing with such high speed. Of course, they break their arms and they have to have Tommy surgery a couple of times. But as someone who's, if you watch the product, it's just a sound advantage.
No, I don't think so. I think it is consistent with a bigger, more spectacular product where things are bigger, faster, stronger, but like Joe said, shorter. You now have some teams that are no longer willing, like the New York Mets, to spend massive amounts of money on starting pitchers because they all break down. And a starting pitcher only pitches 5 or 6 out of every 45 innings. It's not worth the investment. So it's harder to calculate where we're headed because of the breakdown of starting pitching, where they're told to just go as long, throw the ball as hard as they can for as long as they can and wait for their arm to blow out inevitably. And this is the thing with gambling, is that you're it's a different angle on this question, but you're sort of gambling against the inevitable injuries that players are getting to an incredible degree. The Los Angeles Dodgers have 15 pitchers on the injured list now. So especially for people that are betting long-term, like who's going to win the pennant, who's going to win the World Series, or even who's going to win a given series between a couple of teams, there's so many variables now that, I think gambling is following baseball more than it is leading it.
Joe Schaefer, Andrew Moran, Tim Donner, thanks for being here. And that's all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio American Network. I've been your host, Mark Angeles. Thank you to our guests today, Andrew Moran, Joe Schaefer, and Tim Donner. You are appreciated, and thank you, the listeners at home, for tuning in each and every week. Please remember, Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, nor legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.